All right, we are live. Welcome back to another edition of Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. I am your host, Todd Rosales. Sorry, folks. I am checking my microphone levels. It's been a while since I've done one of these, so I want to make sure that I'm not screaming into a microphone that you guys can't hear me in. Folks, we've reduced the frequency of the show, if you haven't seen, to once a week. That is in conjunction with my busy schedule. We hope to bring it back up to 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week. But candidly, we're going to bring these episodes to you opportunistically as we find great people to talk to. We're going to sit down with them. If we can bank a few, great. If not, we promise we'll get to you once a week. So I hope you've been enjoying it. I know the frequency isn't there, but the quality of videos are certainly going up. Before we get into today's episode is brought to you by Contempo Specialty Packaging. You guys know how I feel about packaging in this industry. It is the worst. Every time I buy something, there's usually a few layers of cardboard or plastic between me and my product. I told you I bought that loaded coat joint. Awesome joint, but like paper packaging over plastic packaging till I finally got to the joint. I understand that we have to do childproof and everything else, but come on, that's a little bit wasteful. It's a little bit much. You guys have a great product. Let's get the packaging there too. My friends at Contempo, they have a 100% hemp offering. If you look, this is one of their hemp offerings right here. See, 100% hemp. I don't know why I'm going off camera. I can see the camera here. My mistake. So we have the 100% hemp offering. These guys have a 40-year packaging background servicing the top brands in the world of fashion. And over 4 years, I got to say, it's coming up to 5 because they've been sponsored for a while. I'm going to have to check with the Contempo guys, but 4 years of cannabis packaging experience. They work with most of the largest brands in the industry, and the 100% hemp packaging is just one of their many offers. You guys know I love these. They're joint packs. I think these are great. I actually just recently gave some of these to a friend to carry their joints, right? Not even, you've got this one is beautiful as a single holder. It also does vape cartridges and things like that. We've got some really cool edibles containers for anybody who's doing gummies or anything along those lines. This container would be really, really cool, almost reminiscent of the old Altoid containers. And then this is one of the most beautiful eighth jars I've seen. And this isn't even for a specific brand. So if you have a brand that you think this jar is going to fit, why don't you take advantage of it, right? If you want to check them out, head over to contempopackaging.com. That is contempopackaging.com, and let them know that I sent you. And of course, if you can't remember that, just shoot me an email here at the show and we'll make sure you get connected to them. All right, folks, where is my guest? There's my guest. All right. So a while back, we did the famous Elevate Your Grind cooking show. And the reason that we did that is A, because I'm a whore for content, and B, because I'm really interested in cannabis making its way into the mainstream and really people taking something that is eventually going to be a commodity, or is a commodity at this point, and integrating it into the rest of society, into the rest of everything that we do. My guest today probably embodies that more than anybody else that I've spoken to in the industry. It's people like her that, to me, are help fighting the stigma and bringing in those kind of curious that all you freaking brands say that you're targeting this massive group. Well, she's bringing them in, and she's getting them from kind of curious and making them cannabis, fanatics and fans and everything else. And she's doing it in a way that I think interests people both inside and outside the industry. Some of the things she's doing are curated dinners. She's in the cannabis beverage space, and something that I tell this story a lot. It happened to me by accident, but I once perfectly paired a cannabis and a wine together. And it was such a great experience that I've been chasing it ever since. So with me today is the founder of the Herb Somm, the author of The Ultimate Guide to CBD, and also the author of Cannabis Drinks. Please welcome Jamie Evans. Jamie, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me on the show today, Todd, and hello to all of your listeners.
Oh, please. It is an absolute pleasure. So for the next hour to an hour and a half, I'm basically just going to be planning a party and picking out all the elements with you from the infusion thing, because I'm very intrigued in this topic. So, you had a deep history in the wine industry, which is a very cool industry in itself. It's very sophisticated. There's a lot of nuances to wine, and a lot of people will compare cannabis to alcohol. I think specifically, maybe sometimes they'll do craft brew, or to me, they just compare it to whatever they know best. But truly, cannabis, if you're going to go one-to-one comparison, wine from a recreational standpoint will be where it is, because there are so many different personal tastes and so many different varieties. And, wine from one region is not like wine from another region. Whereas, you can have Japanese whiskey and American whiskey that will be relatively similar. So on that note, you spent a long time in wine. You never thought you were going to leave. What was the draw that brought you into cannabis? Was it the similarities? Was it that there was a lot of cannabis circling, or was it just two passions coming together?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I come from a long history of working in the wine industry. So I spent over a decade working with all different kinds of brands. I worked in a tasting room. I worked in wine PR. I also did a lot of wine events all throughout my career. And I actually went to school for wine and viticulture as well. So started studying wine at the young age of 18.
So hold on. When you go to school and you
Yeah.
tell your parents what you're majoring in and you say, I'm majoring in wine, they're like, yeah, I made that joke as a kid too. It's like, no, here's my coursework. I'm majoring in wine. I mean, how does that conversation go?
Yeah. Well, actually, it was my mom's idea to
Very
go
cool.
into the wine business. So she was a high school counselor and really saw the potential of working in the wine business, especially as someone who was born and raised in California. And the wine industry is just this booming industry that she thought I could have a really successful path in. So I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I majored in wine and viticulture. And all throughout kind of my studies at Cal Poly, I was also experimenting with many different cannabis strains. So I can remember coming back from my wine sensory evaluation classes and smelling these different cannabis strains and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, there's just so many similarities when it comes to the aromas of both wine and cannabis. But back then, there really wasn't a lot of research. The conversation around cannabis was certainly much different than it is today. So it really wasn't until 2017 that I really looked into cannabis for more medicinal purposes rather than recreational. And I started doing more research, and I quickly discovered that cannabis is just this amazing plant that benefits our bodies in so many ways. So it was really at that point that I wanted to get into cannabis. And I kind of also experienced this terrible car accident near my home in Sausalito. And so kind of all of these things together, directed my path more into the cannabis industry. So that's when I decided to launch the Herb Somm and really focus on the culinary side to cannabis.
See, that's really cool to me because you had, kind of this ancillary thing that you weren't studying in college that was just part of your life, and you can see the similarities to it. And I think a lot of people, and if like that have been in the workforce for a little bit that are not just in college now, like that's how you got your education and how we got to this point with cannabis, because someone like you can see the similarities where that knowledge wasn't readily available, where today we have all these different courses, we have things like your blog that we can go to and educate ourselves. And I think that's a really cool path to take. I want to circle back to your actual education in this because I think, obviously I made the joke earlier, but, I try to be funny on this show. It doesn't always work. But I imagine that your coursework was very scientific. Like I'm sure you got some fun stuff to do and tour vineyards and try the wine and stuff, but I imagine a lot of what you were doing was very scientific, a lot of molecules, compounds, smells, combinations, and everything else like that. And I think that's a really good kind of or a comparison to how people look at the cannabis industry. Like I'm sure you've heard the joke that I made a million times, and we all hear those jokes when we go into the cannabis space. But I imagine that education that you experience is very similar to what you're seeing starting to come to fruition in cannabis now.
Yeah, absolutely. So throughout my degree at Cal Poly, the greatest thing about Cal Poly too is they have this motto of learn by doing. So they really make you get your hands dirty and make some wine and go out into the vineyard. And I took care of 3 vines for a quarter, so really learned how to take care of the plant. But I also studied soil science, chemistry. I took wine sensory evaluation classes, as I mentioned earlier, to really help you think about aromas and flavors and how you can pick out these different nuances in a wine. And all of these things can be related to cannabis as well. And so I think with my approach at the Herb Somm, I've always kind of tried to tap in to what I've learned throughout, my education, throughout my career, and how making those things relate to cannabis has just been really important to me.
Very cool. So these two educations led you to founding the Herb Somm in 2007. And I'm curious to know at that point, because to me, when I look at you as an entrepreneur and as a business person, to me, it looks like, and I don't mean to say this in a negative way, that you were unsure of the best way to approach the business. So you decided, let me build a platform to showcase my knowledge and my passion. And I'm going to
Yes.
leverage that platform for opportunities like your books, and we'll shamelessly plug them here, right? You know, your two books here, the dinners
Hmm.
that you do, and also the wine brand that you have that we'll get into in a second. And again, I don't mean that in a negative space, but I think that's kind of the new age entrepreneur where it's, I
Yeah.
don't know what job I want in this industry. It's very nascent. And I think there are a lot of us in this industry that took an opposite path and got whatever job was available to learn. And then you have another job and another job, another job, because you're trying to find this place in this industry. And next thing
Right.
you know, your LinkedIn looks like shit. And everyone's like, oh, well, that's not a respectable worker. It's like, well, they were just trying to find their place in the world. So
Yeah, exactly.
as an entrepreneur, I'm curious to understand what led you to say, okay, let me build this platform first. Let me put this information out there, and then I'm
Mhm.
going to leverage that for future opportunities.
Yeah. So when I decided to launch the Herb Somm, like I said, I was really focused on this culinary side to cannabis and really tried to tap into what I knew about food and wine. And during that time too, I was just meeting a bunch of different cannabis chefs and edible producers. And just the thought of, using cannabis as an ingredient was just so fascinating to me. So I wanted to get into the cannabis space, but I didn't have any traditional capital to form like a traditional business. So I decided to start a blog and then just interview all these chefs I was meeting along the way. I started writing different pieces on like pairing cannabis with food and, really trying to become kind of like the food and wine of cannabis, if you will.
Very cool.
and and I just really kind of fell in love with all of the chef's stories and this idea of cooking with cannabis. So in 2018, when cannabis went recreational here in California, I decided to, lean on my event experience that I was doing in the wine world and kind of really bring my blog to life. So I started hosting cannabis infused dinners with the chefs that I met along the way. And so we would really come, we'd plan these dinners as you would like a winemaker dinner, for instance. So it'd be a 4-course meal. I would pair wines with the meal. The chefs would infuse all the dishes, but each course would really highlight a terpene profile that we wanted to talk about. And we'd also pair flower with each dish as well. So you're kind of getting, this 3 levels of pairing. So you have the food, you have the wine, and you have the cannabis. And it's really about educating the guests on how to think about cannabis, as this gourmet ingredient, but also in this elevated level that you can sit down with your friends and family and enjoy it over a delicious meal. So that was kind of the goal behind that event series.
So I'm the worst person about this because everything that you just said sounds amazing to me. Amazing. And I always want to try this stuff. And I was one of the first people who said, I can't wait to try cannabis beverage. I wanted to try Cynthia's and I wanted to try a can and everything else. I
Yeah.
have people send me, or I go get great edibles with like Hervé. I know they're on your Valentine's Day list. They're
Yes.
macaroons. I like to smoke flower. So I'm really bad, like, at doing the edible thing or using cannabis any other way, but I'm so intrigued by it. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm very curious. I want to dig into these dinners, right? So you
Okay.
set up a 4-course meal, you different terpene profiles and everything else. So when you're serving this infused food, how do you
Yeah.
start thinking about dosage and your different
Mm-hmm.
audience, especially if you're going to pair with flour? Because my biggest fear with
Yeah.
this is I do enjoy smoking. So my biggest fear is that
Sure.
I eat this awesome meal and then I smoke a joint somewhere in it. And then next thing I know, I didn't, because I'm also a big boy and I enjoy my food. So if it's tasty, I'm probably going to eat more than my serving size, right? So my biggest fear
Mm-hmm.
is that like I'm going to overdo it and I'm going to be kind of
Yeah.
comatose at the end. So how do you handle it when it comes to different dosing for people? Is it and then I really like to get
Mm-hmm.
into the pairing, but let's focus on dosing first.
Okay, dosing. Well, that's a really good question. So dosing is one of the most important things to think about when you're serving infused food. And so at my events, I would actually give the guests the opportunity to choose their dosage. And then we would only serve 5 milligrams max of THC throughout the entire meal. So it's very,
Okay.
very low dose.
So 4 course would
And
be 20 milligrams, which sounds like a good amount. I mean, like
well,
a
no,
nice.
it's actually 5 milligrams total.
Oh,
So each
wow.
dish was a microdose. And the reason why I wanted to go with very low dose is because you're having these other things along with the meals. You're having wine, you're having your
Mhm.
smokables. And I think when you're doing, kind of like this microdose approach, you can really, guide the guest through this experience without anyone getting too high. And the great thing is, each chef that I worked with had a different method of infusing the meal for their guests. So some
Huh.
chefs really wanted to serve, all 5 milligrams up front in the first dish, and then focus on some minor cannabinoids throughout the other dishes. So maybe incorporate some, some CBD, some THCA, and then other chefs would like to dose maybe 1 milligram of THC with each course. And so it was just really interesting, working with these chefs and having them put their creativity into it, but also kind of have them, help me guide the guests through their menu in that way. And I think, when you're serving alcohol and you're serving cannabis, it's all about moderation. And so this is why I think like the low dose approach for my events works so well. And then one thing to note is probably about 10% of guests that were coming to these dinners were brand new to cannabis. So, some people were very nervous to have 5 milligrams.
Mhm.
And then some guests, they're like, I'm more comfortable with 2.5 milligrams. But these chefs are just so incredible that they can actually customize each person's meal based on their preference. But I've also had high dosers come to the meals as well. And so what the chef will do is, if you're very confident in your edible consumption skills and you know what your body can handle, the chef can always give you more. So I've been at dinners where the chef will top, your dish with some extra THC olive oil, or even put a little bit of extra sauce on it. So it's very customizable, and I think that's one of the most important things about infused dining experiences is just having it customizable for each person, because we're all so different at the end of the day.
That's really cool. I really like the way that you talk about the experience, especially the 5 milligrams across the entire meal, because looking at
Yeah.
that and kind of putting myself in that shoes, it feels like, you would
Mm-hmm.
leave that meal if you didn't consume anything else at the end of it and just feel relaxed and
Mm-hmm.
feel
Right.
good and positive. You may not feel medicated at all in that sense. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, depending on what your
Mm-hmm.
consumption tolerance is. But it sounds like a meal that you would just have a good time and enjoy yourself and probably be one of the
Yeah.
best versions of yourself. And then if you're wanted to imbibe more, that's when you can pair a wine with a joint or something like that and continue to go.
Exactly.
To me, this
Yep.
sounds like an incredible experience. And I think one of the reasons that I'm so interested in it is my experience in cannabis. And one of the reasons that I enjoy it has always been around food. And for me, it's always been about having cannabis, smoking a joint, and then going to a great restaurant and friends and having a great time. And I feel like you're curating that experience for a lot of people who may not get to experience it. I've never mentioned this guy in a podcast or anything else. I never thought I would, but you look at a guy like Anthony Bourdain, and he had an
Right.
affinity for cannabis. And I think if we look at Bourdain, everyone can say that he truly enjoyed life when he went and traveled the world and ate food, and that was
Mm-hmm.
kind of him
Absolutely.
leading him. That I think that's an experience that the average human, especially in our country with such a busy work schedule, doesn't get to enjoy. So are you still doing these dinners, or have those, I know COVID wise, if
Yes.
if we ever get out of this thing, will you start doing them again?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. So I was doing these dinners all the way up till COVID started, and I was about to go on my first book tour, and we were going to do a pop up in New York. And I'm so sad we didn't get to do it. But I think, I've been very careful about when to relaunch these
Mhm.
events, just because it is such an intimate experience. And just the venue I was working with in San Francisco, we would have 40 guests at this meal. And I think there will be a time and place when I kick them up. I'm thinking next spring, especially around the time that my wine products are starting to hit the market, and really focus on doing some fun events around my new product as well. So there's definitely some dinners down the line for sure.
Very cool. So we talked about the dosing side. I'm not letting you
Yeah.
go on these dinners yet, because now like this is like my favorite thing in the world now.
Yeah.
My birthday's in July. I need to figure out a way to incorporate this into it. So
Oh yeah.
the terpene profiles and actually pairing the wine and the cannabis and the food and everything else. So I go on your website, theherbsomm.com. You have a pairing guide, which is really cool on there. Actually, I sent that to a very notable celebrity who is a wine fan because I'm connected to him. So I'll tell you who that is after. And he liked
great.
it a lot. So I don't want to mention him by name because it's not my friend. So I don't want to drop that name yet, but I think it's really cool. So I'm not smart enough to figure out the pairing guide yet, but that's why we're talking here today. So when you are how do you actually go about, obviously with the chefs, choosing the menu and then figuring out, because I have a hard enough time pairing wine and food. I love wine. I want to know more about it, but I'm not the guy who's picking out the wine bottle at the table. I can tell you, and this is something I tell everybody, when I went to Italy, I would get anxiety at the beginning of the meal because the wine lists were just getting bigger and bigger every restaurant that we went to. And I didn't know, it was
especially
me and my
in
wife
Italy.
doesn't know wine. She doesn't know what to pick. And then all of a sudden we get to this one really nice restaurant in Italy, and the guy drops the encyclopedia down on me. It's like this thick, it's handwritten, it's by region and everything else. And I just look at it, I go, can you pick me something, sir? Like, so going back to that, how to me, it's just amazing that you have the ability to do this and that you specialize in it. But how do you start considering what to pair with what and what complements everything? Is it more of a matching things? Is it more of a complementing things? Is it like our old color wheel to figure that out? Just kind of explain to me that process.
Yeah, I love this question. So every time that we would do these dinners, I would sit down with the chef. I'd have our cannabis. We usually have like a cannabis partner who brings in flower. So I love to support small growers. So a lot of sun-grown flower comes to the event. So the grower will come to these meetings, and then I'll have my wine partner, or I'll have, a winery representative come in, and we'll all sit down together, and we'll have just kind of like a brainstorming session where we're smelling and we're tasting the wines, we're tasting the cannabis. And then from there, we kind of pick what terpene profiles we want to highlight. And then the chef during this session, they'll sit down and think, okay, well, these nuances in the cannabis and the wine remind me of this dish. So it's a very collaborative process where we're creating these pairings, but really it's all about choosing things that really complement each other. So for instance, I think I'm trying to think of a dish that we can talk about. Okay, so one of my chefs made this brilliant salmon dish. It had this bright citrus sauce on it. So we paired that with a rosé that also kind of had this citrusy characteristic. And then we also picked a strain that was high in the terpene limonene to kind of complement everything that was going on in the dish and the wine. So it really was this like collaborative process and choosing things that worked very well together.
Interesting. So I really like this, and I've been looking at the pairing guide, and it's funny because I look at it and I go, do I want to build my meal based off the wine I like? Do I want to build my meal based off the weed I like? Or do I want to build my meal based off the food that I like? I love that you have crossed so many different categories here. Like I'm looking, was just starting with cannabis. My favorite terpene mostly is usually limonene dominant. And then I look, I'm like, what could I eat with that? And I see this oysters, seared scallops. Well, I love both of those. And then, pair that with a nice Chardonnay. This to me, maybe I am smart enough to figure this out. I like this a lot.
You could. Yeah. And something that people don't realize is, terpenes are in all different ingredients. They're in wine, they're in beer, they're in cannabis. So when we think about pairing these things together, it's very viable because everything has like terpenes that, and they bring these aromas and flavors and therapeutic properties as well. So I think when you're looking at this pairing guide, I decided to list the 6 most common terpenes found in cannabis, But these terpenes are also found in many different foods, in your wine and beer as well. So you can really pair things together based on this chart. And I actually give each guest at my event this pairing guide as well. So as they're going through this experience, they use this as a cheat sheet. So they can be like, oh, I smell, I smell some citrus in this cannabis, and they can easily go to the terpene and kind of figure it out from there. So
very cool. I feel like this is just what everybody just sits and talks to you about, just picking your brain about this. Like, you don't get to have conversations about like the weather or anything else like that anymore.
People definitely love to talk about food, wine, and cannabis with me all day, but those are my favorite things in the whole world. So I'm just thrilled to be in this space.
Very cool. So you were able to take your platform and you have these books. I want to focus on this one. This one, really cool book, all things CBD. You have so many great people in here that are sharing their experience and everything else. But what I really love about this book has seemed to be a theme of, what you've been talking about throughout this whole thing. Along with those dinners, to me, and you just talked about it with the cards and leading people through the pairings and everything else, there's a big educational factor to it, because as much as I would love to sit through and just experience the meal, the education to me is also, just as important. I love, my TV sits on the food channel and the cooking channel just to hear those stories and those experiences and hear the background behind it. But what I love about this book is I think we get to page 71 before there's really a recipe in here. And it's just all about education, right? How to infuse, what the mixology is, the different parts of infusion, decarboxylation, boiling points and things like that. It's literally, 4 chapters of pure education which is great, because not only are you going to make these recipes, and you have pretty awesome recipes in here, but you're also going to understand how to do them correctly and how to make sure that it's, that it's infused properly and everything else. And to me, I think that's the most important thing, because I could easily give this to a friend. So I have a friend who lives here locally, and she loves making craft cocktails on the weekends. And I could be like, hey, here's this book. You're really going to enjoy it. But she may not understand it. She may not understand how to do the infusion process. Not everybody made pot brownies in college, right? So, and that's, to me, that's only one way. The only thing I know how to do is make an infused butter. I'm not putting butter into a cocktail, I'll tell you that much. So,
except for butter coffee is very good.
Well, there you go. I want to get to cannabis and coffee too. But to me, to give somebody a pure education to where if I gave gave her this specific book, she'd probably know more than I do about these processes before she even made a cocktail. So how important to you doing what you do? And I think, I know the answer, I'm leading you here, obviously, is education to what you do, because to me, I think things like this are the best way to mainstream cannabis, but the way that you approach the education, to me, is one of the most important things, more so than all the awesome recipes in the back of the book. And we'll talk about some of these too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And something that was just really important to me when my publisher approached me to write this book was to provide that education. So I really wanted to write it in a way that really broke it down into the basics of understanding cannabinoids and understanding how cannabis works with your body, but also exploring cannabis, from the culinary level and how to work with it in the kitchen, because there are so many things that you have to know when it comes to cooking temperatures and how to best maintain your terpenes and cannabinoids, because there's just a lot of things that you can do by mistake when you're making these infusions. And a lot of people don't, know those things. So I really wanted to start with almost a lifestyle guide, especially with the Ultimate Guide. This is truly a lifestyle guide. And it's not just all about CBD. I know it's called the Ultimate Guide to CBD, but it really takes you through, a full examination of cannabis and how you can incorporate it into everyday life. And I think this is a great book too to share with your family, which, may or may not be so comfortable with cannabis. And for instance, like my grandmother, she lives in the Midwest, and she thought I was totally crazy when I went off to work in the cannabis space. And, for her to read this book, it just really helped her understand cannabis in a different way. So that was also really important to me too, is just to provide a book that, any type of consumer could really enjoy.
On this book, real quick, I'm just going to chime in. I don't mean to gloss over this one, because what I love about this one is, for me, CBD is very much a part of like a dietary supplement, right? It almost like a multivitamin. I think people should take it daily. My dad asked me, he's like, if I take CBD, am I going to feel better? I go, not like right away, but I go, if you take it, I go, a day, 2 days, 7 days, 2 weeks, like you're going to start feeling better over time. And that's when you're going to start to feel it. I think for most people, taking a tincture is kind of unnatural, just because we don't really do it that often. But to have something like this that shows you the ways to incorporate it, whether it is CBD or cannabis, into your daily life through food, through healthy food, through beverages and everything else, I think this makes it a lot easier for people to get their doses of CBD versus having to remember to take it as a multivitamin, especially if you're not someone who takes vitamins or anything else like that in the morning. This is a much easier way to do it.
Yeah. Like for me, I love putting just a teaspoon of CBD honey in my tea every morning. And, because like we have all these different products now as well, it just really helps, people take CBD the way that they want to. So even if you're not very comfortable with tinctures, there's also, these types of edible products, which can make that easier to do.
Very cool. No, I like the idea of it. And it's funny. I was always looking for a CBD coffee. And like you said, putting the honey in your tea, I realized that I should just continue to make the coffee that I like and add CBD to it, because listen, CBD coffee companies, you guys are all great, but you haven't caught up to regular coffee companies yet. So I'm going to start with the good coffee, and then I'm going to add the good CBD, and then we'll do it that way until there's a good one. But, something like this, I mean, I was never, I was going to keep most of my cannabis and my alcohol consumption separate, but looking at this and I'm like, I'm not a cocktail guy. I'm not. I'm a straight whiskey, beer, or wine. That's what I drink. But I go through here and there's one that caught my eye, laid back Manhattan. I'm like,
oh yeah.
I'm like, okay, that's my speed. And I can absolutely see myself enjoying one of these. I just need to learn the process on how to infuse bitters.
Yeah. And honestly, once you learn how to infuse bitters, and I love actually putting bitters in so many drinks. And I think a lot of people don't realize that bitters go into a lot of cocktails when you're at a cocktail bar, and it just really helps tie your ingredients together. And also, so in cannabis drinks, there's a lot of great bitters recipes. There's actually a celery bitters, and there is a citrus bitters recipe as well. But it's just a really great tool to have in your cannabis pantry, and it can really just microdose any drink that you want. And I think once you have kind of like this bar pantry lined up too, it just makes it so much easier to craft any type of cannabis cocktail as well.
No, these things are really cool. And like I said, to me, like as somebody, especially in my group of friends, so I live in Florida, I'm kind of the cannabis expert, and it fell into that way because I'm the only one who's in the industry, not just someone who consumes it. So like, a lot of my friends will look to me for things like this, and, to have something like this to give them, because I am not like a huge cocktail person, but to have, something that talks about it is very, very important to me, and it's very easy to help kind of spread the word. I'm curious to know, just with your experience, because you have all the experience with food and beverages. I know that you're in the cannabis beverage space. You did the dinners and all that. Do you see a difference in how it affects people, whether it's consumed via beverage or via food? Like, is it quicker onset? Is it a different experience?
I was just talking about this the other day. With beverages, it's really interesting, especially with how beverages are being made. So a lot of beverage companies are using nano emulsion to infuse their drinks. So with this nano emulsion technology, the cannabinoids are actually absorbed into your body much quicker. So the onset times can be anywhere from 5 minutes to like 15 minutes. It's pretty incredible. And when I eat an edible, on the other hand, you have to digest it. And so, it typically does take longer. I mean, it depends on your digestive system as well, but I usually, start feeling an edible much later. So I think with the drinks, they do set in quicker, almost resembling, drinking a glass of wine or beer. So how you're kind of getting that feeling after you drink a glass of those traditional, adult beverages. But I think the future of cannabis drinks is just incredibly exciting because of the onset time, because of the innovation and all the technology that's happening right now to really make these drinks a reality. So it's been pretty cool to witness.
Very cool. Well, I want to get into your opinion on and thoughts on the future of social consumption. But before we get there, we have been focusing on drinks for a little bit. And you
Yeah.
have a drink or will be having a drink in the market soon, which I think is really cool. It is inspired from French wine and is a
Yes.
non-alcoholic infused beverage because that's what they make you call it. It's a cannabis wine, folks,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned. I'll say it. It's a cannabis wine. She can't say it because it's her company. But
Yeah.
it is a French wine, essentially French style wine, essentially infused with cannabis called Herbacée. Did I get it right? Herbacée?
Herbacée.
Not very good with foreign languages. I am unfortunately an
But
ignorant American.
the cool thing about this name is no matter how you say it, it sounds cool. So,
It does. I liked Herbacée, but
yeah.
Herbacée, that's so tell
Yep.
me about this drink because again,
Sure.
I'm all about mainstreaming cannabis. And if somebody, I truly feel in the right social setting, you show up with a joint, not everybody might want to partake, but all of a sudden you have a beautiful bottle of cannabis wine. And don't get me wrong, the bottle
Yes.
is beautiful. I
Oh,
think
thank
people are going
you.
to say, hey, I'll take a little bit of that. Can I try that? So talk to us about the product.
Yeah. Well, obviously, this product is very near and dear to my heart just because of, where my career started out in wine. And to have this opportunity to create a cannabis infused wine has just been one of the most exciting and challenging things I've ever done in my career. So I'm very excited to launch. We're actually going to be launching hopefully around holiday season this year, but we are launching with a sparkling rosé. And the whole concept behind Herbacée is really honoring these French inspired wine blends. And so our first product will be a blend of Grenache, Mourvedre, and Cinsault. And it's very kind of like south of France. It's very light and bright on your palate. It has great acidity. And of course, it's sparkling, which I think just makes it even more like fun to drink on your palate. And just the whole vision behind this product is to really create a cannabis beverage that you can pair with food, you can have over a meal and really share with your friends. And I think that with the flavor profile that I've created, it's really coming to life in this exciting way. And I'm very excited to share it with everybody. So it's been a fun project.
I think that's so cool. And I think that's going to be a huge part of the industry. I think, people kind of went in a few directions when they came out with beverages. And I think flavored seltzers were an
Mm-hmm.
early leader because that's also what happened to be popular with
Oh, yeah.
alcohol. But to me, that's just chasing what people are already drinking. Based on your entire experience, cannabis and wine pairings sound like the
Mm-hmm.
perfect opportunity because you have that ability to figure out what's going to go inside of this wine and
Yes.
complement it well. And I also it helps me kind of realize where we are in the industry, that entrepreneurs, that there is a lot of opportunity in this space because I myself, we started with a cannabis brand with Heisman, and I look at that and I look at you and Cynthia in the wine space, and it's not even like who's got the best cannabis wine, it's how big is that category going to get, because look
Right.
how big wine is, and there's a place
It's
for everybody
huge.
in wine, right? Everybody has their niche, and I almost feel like the cannabis wine section at some point will
Mm-hmm.
be as large as the greater cannabis um, industry, because you have that many different flavor profiles and taste profiles in wine
Oh,
itself. And I
totally.
think people are going to enjoy a cannabis wine sometimes over an alcohol wine, because let's be honest, sometimes a red wine hangover is a nasty effing hangover, and
Oh,
it'd be very
terrible.
nice to be able to enjoy it without that.
Yeah, and I think at this point, there's only a handful of cannabis wine producers, and we all collaborate with each other. So we don't look at each other as competitors. We're really trying to help grow this category, and hopefully one day it will be as big as wine. And I think as the innovation continues, as the science gets better, these products are getting delicious. And like you said, there's so much room for creativity, especially when it comes to a wine, because there's so many different grape varieties. There's so many different styles of wine that you can create. And we can create these things, you know, with these nano emulsions that we have, and infusing it into the drink. So it's pretty incredible. And I just can't wait to see where it goes.
I mean, I don't need to make bold predictions here or anything else, but given your background and the opportunity I see in the cannabis wine space, I mean, I see you guys starting to become like the yellowtail of the cannabis wine space. And I think that not like, you know, like when I say yellowtail, I mean like big and huge and popular and every
Yeah.
different variety, just because you know it. You have that advantage in you that you know what people are going to like and what it pairs with and everything else. And I see that being a massive opportunity for you.
Great.
Both
Well,
of your
I hope
passions.
so. I honestly think just the cannabis drinks category itself, it's just been really fun to see all the different types of drinks that are coming out. So, you know, now there's a cannabis infused cider, there's cannabis infused coffee, there's seltzers. I heard someone talking about a cannabis infused sake, which isn't out yet, but someone was thinking about doing it, which sounds pretty cool. So I really think there's a lot of creativity, and I can't wait to see how this category continues to grow over these next 5 years.
Have you found an actual THC infused coffee?
Yes, somatic. Have you had somatic before?
I have not, but this is like
Okay.
high on my list of things to find.
Yeah, so they were making an amazing cold brew, and they had their THC blend, and I think they had a balanced ratio blend as well. So if you look in my cannabis drinks book, they actually wrote a beautiful spotlight on cannabis and coffee, and they provided a few recipes as well.
Very cool. Well, I'm gonna have
Yeah.
to check that out. Listen, I want to talk to you because again, I think the things that you're talking about are the future of social cannabis consumption. So this is a topic we've talked about a lot. We talk about consumption lounges and everything else. I think for
Mm-hmm.
cannabis, or when cannabis goes mainstream, or for when it goes mainstream, the guys like me are going to be left behind. And it's unfortunate because I do love smoking a joint, but I also realize that this country and this world has fought very hard to take smoke out of a lot of physical places. And I completely understand that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
when I happen to be smoking out in public and I see people, I move, not because I'm worried that, you know, I'm smoking cannabis, because I don't need to blow smoke in their face. It's just trying to be respectful in that manner.
Yeah.
So, you know, I share this experience because one of the more recent things I've done is I've started going to live comedy shows again, and cannabis and comedy go hand in hand. So I like to consume before I go into
Absolutely.
the club. Exactly. I like to consume before I go into the club. And living in Florida, and probably shouldn't admit this, but you know, it's like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to stand in the parking garage and consume this before we go into the show. And then when I'm done smoking my joint, I get to be a normal
Mm-hmm.
human being and rejoin society and get, you know, hang out with all the people that are openly getting blackout drunk. Right.
Right.
So
Yep.
for the future of cannabis consumption, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to spark that joint in or around the comedy club, but I truly think the infused foods, not just edibles, but infused foods and beverages and everything else, are the future of cannabis consumption. Clearly, you built
Mm-hmm.
an entire company around that, but talk to me about what you believe the future of social consumption is going to be.
Oh, I 100% agree with you. I think, you know, we're already seeing lounges open out here in California, which is, you know, really based on social consumption. And cannabis drinks are definitely a part of that. But I think also there was a lounge in West Hollywood that opened up where you could smoke cannabis alongside your meal, which I thought was really cool too.
Yeah.
So I think, like, depending on the venue, you know, depending on what the cafe is standing up for, I think there's a lot of room for opportunity on all different sides of social consumption. And, you know, one day personally, I would love to see a cannabis drink bar open up where we could go in and you can get your favorite cannabis drink and just enjoy it like we do at an alcohol bar. I think that would be really cool. But also, I would just love to see, you know, us enjoy cannabis alongside our meal.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe we'll have a cannabis restaurant where you could choose a wine off those wine lists we were talking about earlier. So I think the future is very bright for culinary cannabis. And I do think, like, social consumption, you know, especially with the food and wine, or the, you know, the food and beverage side of cannabis, is probably more acceptable in a lot of people's eyes. But I do think there is something to be said about smoking flower alongside your meal as well, because I do enjoy that too.
Oh, I agree with that. I think as we go further into this, it's going to kind of split off into cannabis integrated into like daily places like your comedy clubs, your bars, your restaurants, and everything else.
Yeah,
And that's going to be your drinks and foods or in olive
right,
oils or anything else like that. And then you're going to have like these cigar style lounges and hopefully they'll
right.
have the
Yeah.
ability to also have food where it's I know if I'm going in there that I'm going to come out smelling like weed and smoke, like, just like a
Yeah,
cigar lounge. Cause I fully understand that. I'm
for
not,
sure.
telling anybody what they're doing is wrong. Trust me, I'm part of the group. But like you said, the Cannabis Cafe, there's a place that I
Yeah.
thought was really cool. My wife doesn't smoke. No, she doesn't consume.
Hmm.
So for me smoking a joint at the table and blowing it in her face or even around her and being respectful, it's not that
Right.
much of an enjoyable experience for her. Whereas I'm saying, hey, we're going to this place. It is a smoking lounge. It's like, okay, I know what I'm signing up for. So
Exactly. Yeah.
I,
Hmm.
that's my prediction. I also think what a really cool concept would be. I think I'm at the random thoughts part of this conversation, but I see the cannabis beverage space really blowing up, especially in California, where you guys have the opportunity to put out good stuff. I would love to see in the near future a dispensary concept that is beverage first, beverage focused, right?
Yeah.
Where you
Hmm.
walk
I would
in,
love to see that.
you
Yeah.
walk in and it looks like an ABC Liquors with the back fridges and the
Yep.
wine aisles and a small down version of it. And maybe you have some edibles and stuff too, but maybe no flower. And don't get me wrong, I am a flower guy. That's what I go out there for.
Yeah.
But I think a concept like that would be a lot more welcoming to people that are
Hmm.
just not going to consume flower. I think it'd be a really cool thing to see. And I hope that we see that in the near future in California and maybe somewhere else too.
Yeah. I hope so too. So, all you listeners out there, if you want a very good business concept, definitely launch this forward cannabis dispensary idea. I think
Very
that's a
cool.
great idea.
Well, Jamie, you have done so much. It is hard to go deep on everything here, but I absolutely love the things that you're doing. I'm
Thank
very
you.
excited that Cynthia introduced us and we got to have this conversation. I want to talk to you more about the dinners and everything else. I think there's such a cool concept. I think the way that you're doing it is great, and you have the best education to do it. Before I let you go, is there anything that we missed? Anything you want to share with the audience?
Well, definitely be sure to follow me on my Instagram at the Herb Somm. I post a lot of great recipes, event information. You can find information about my new Herbacée cannabis wine as well on that platform. And head to my website, theherbsomm.com, and you can find even more recipes. You can find the pairing guide we talked about earlier, and so much more. And I hope to see everyone at one of my events one day, and I'm excited to bring them back.
Very cool. I highly recommend going to the website. Not that the other social media platforms are bad, but if you go on her blog, it's got so many cool recipes, not only just drinks and foods, it's got gift guides. I thought it was really cool. You had infused like ice pops, which I thought was
Yeah.
really cool and something different for summer, even though summer's winding down. And then folks, that
Hmm.
pairing guide is really cool. So Jamie, thank you very much for this conversation. You got the plugs out there and we'll definitely do this again sometime.
Thank you so much, Todd. And I hope to see everyone soon.
Cool. And thank you. And thank you to everybody at home. I hope you guys learned something on this episode. This is really fun. Definitely go follow Jamie, check out her website. Um, I want to come up with a cool concept, something to do with her content wise, because I think what she's doing is great. I think this is how we mainstream cannabis, folks. We will be back next week. Don't have the show scheduled yet, but we will pick a day next week, probably going to be Tuesday or Wednesday. And we'll be on with the folks from Ease talking about all things cannabis delivery in California. And we've got some great shows coming up. We've got some special stuff planned for MJ BizCon. So stay tuned. Head to our YouTube, youtube.com/elevate your grind. This episode will be there live on Monday, along with our entire library. Please like and subscribe. That's how we keep going, folks. It's been another episode of Elevate Your Grind. We'll see you next week.